Welcome back to the Metal Exchange. Justin and Chris back again. It is that time of year once again. Best of 2024. I am really excited for this, but before we get into all things recapping last year, how are you, my friend?
Good, I'm good. It's been a long and annoying week that I'm glad is over, and this is really probably my favorite episode that we do every year. I really look forward to it, in particular because we really don't give too much of this away ahead of time to each other, and so I like that we get to be a little bit surprised. I will be curious to see what's surprising to you and what's not, and same with, vice versa. There's always a good handful of stuff on your list that I'd never even heard of, so that's always interesting. And it was an interesting year. I wish I had the chance to spend more time listening to music in general, but I just didn't. So my list definitely came together at pretty much the last minute, much like most of my studies did for 16 years of schooling. And don't ask me about the night Halloween played at Coney Island High, and I had a midterm the next day. I feel very good about my top 25 list. I've in the past have always done a list of 50. I will release the bottom 25 in the next week or two. I'm still kind of sorting that out, but it is happening. But since we usually only talk about the top 25 anyway on the actual podcast, I figure we're good to go in that sense. If I feel like something just somehow like managed to leapfrog its way into the top 25, I will make note of it, but I honestly don't think that's going to happen, so I'm not too concerned.
Well, I look forward to it. As you mentioned, we have no idea what these lists are. We have not gone into detail about any of this stuff, and I will post the full lists. Your top 25, my top 50, I'll post them this week to coincide with the episode. I may even post them towards the end of the week. I want people to have a chance to listen to the episode and not have anything spoiled for them. So, I usually post stuff on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, like our songs of the week. I may post these towards the end of the week, almost recapping best of week here. And I'll post some songs for some of the stuff that's on our lists earlier in the week, because that's not giving away as much. I think that's how I'll do it. But
yeah, I think that's how we've done it in the past anyway.
Yeah. So I think with that all said, let's hear it. What do you have at number 25?
Okay, so number 25, I have Annette Olson's solo album Rapture, which I just really liked. I just really enjoyed this. This is like, I think, becoming a regular thing on Frontiers Records, where Annette gets together with Magnus Carlsen, probably the most mentioned name on this podcast, and
that or Jeff Scott Soto, right?
Yeah, without a doubt. Melissa Bonney lost her positioning this year. I feel like she was barely mentioned, but I mean, it's just like really just solid, melodic metal, and I've just always been such a fan of her vocals. I feel like she's really made a nice career for herself off of just those two Nightwish albums that she was a part. Was it? Yeah, 2 albums. I was like thinking to myself, like, wait, was it only one? No, it was two. And speaking of Nightwish, they're not in this top 25, and so I'll just mention that on the offset here. They kind of landed a little bit on the outside for me, around 30 to 35. It's still that part's still being finalized, but I will say, anytime Nightwish doesn't make a top 25 of the year list, it's automatically a disappointment. And I'm sure we'll talk more about disappointments of the year as we talk about like more specific awards, if you will, or I guess that's not really considered an award, so to speak. But what did you think of this one?
I thought it was good. I don't really have anything bad to say about it. It's not on my list. It's not an honorable mention. It was just in a glut of albums that I enjoyed listening to and then I didn't really go back to. I listened to it twice. I remember listening to it both times. I love Magnus Carlsen's songwriting and I like her vocals, but it's just, I didn't think it was anything spectacular. Just a solid release and something that I could put on right now and I would enjoy. But the stuff I have on my list, I just enjoyed a little bit more. I have to ask you this, though. Did you like the new Nightwish more than the prior album, which I know was on your list or at least in your top 50?
I would have to go back. Now you got me curious as to where I ranked them when it came out, because that also might also have to do with the other albums that came out that year. So let's see. That album came out in 2020. So I had that album, let's see. So I had that album at 19, Human Nature, for my best of 2020.
So it ranked higher, but that doesn't mean you necessarily liked it better.
Yeah, and I also was listening to way less albums, 4 years ago, so that was part of it too. I mean, I don't know. I still am having such a hard time deciding how I feel about this Nightwish album, because there are parts of it that I absolutely love, and there are parts of it that are like a real snooze fest for me. I started listening to it today. I wanted to give it like one last shot to possibly crack the top 25, and like that, the first song, I was like, this might make it, and then it kept going on, and I'm like, no, it's just not. I just don't like it as much as any of the albums in my top 25. So I really gave them as much of the benefit of the doubt as possible, but it just didn't work for me. I just feel like this is a band that, at least for me, is just kind of digressing, especially since, we did an episode on Endless Forms Most Beautiful, which was the first album they did with Floor, and I was a huge fan of it. I think I gave it a 9. And I feel like since that album came out, and I don't know if it has anything to do with Marco not being a part of things anymore, but they've just kind of lost me on these last 2 albums. It's almost like too arty and not enough substance and not enough hooks and not enough like the stuff that made me love Nightwish in the first place. So I mean, I knew even if neither of us had Nightwish on the list, they would have to be discussed, because it's just they're in this odd place, and I feel like a lot of people kind of feel the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I could spoil this. It's not in my top 25. It's not anywhere on my list. I didn't think the album was anything to write home about. I don't know that it's my biggest disappointment of the year. I think something else takes the cake there. In fact, I know it does. Did Virgin Steel come out with an album and I didn't know about it? Listen, if we got to go back and do the classics, because that stuff I love, but they've lost me as well. But I'll say this, as far as the Nightwish goes, I don't know that I had high expectations, so therefore it wasn't as big of a disappointment. And I guess that's just a sad state of affairs there, because the potential is there and all the ingredients are there, because Floor is outstanding. But anyway.
I remember even when Human Nature came out, I said that ranking that album 19 out of 25 or 50, whatever it was disappointing, just because a Nightwish album in any other year for me would have been a top 5 easy, but like potentially a top 3. I mean, if I went back in time, Imaginarium would probably be my album of the year, whatever year that came out. Like Endless Forms would have been high up there. So yeah, not to belabor the point, but it just didn't click for me. And I usually have a pretty open mind about Nightwish, but yeah, it at least didn't have like a second disc of just instrumental music. But it almost, that first disc of Human Nature was almost felt a little bit more focused than the whole Yesterwind, I believe was the name of the album. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see where they fall when it's all said and done. I still like the album. It's just that it's sad that I'm not loving Nightwish albums anymore.
Yeah, it's like bits and pieces of it I thought were very good, and the rest I really could have just not. I could have done without. But anyway, moving on. What do we have at number 24?
If I said to you, what do you think was the tongue twister album title of the year? What do you think the answer would be to that question?
To the album title or to the band?
The album title.
I would say Alcest, because I don't think you speak French, but I don't think that's at number 24. What do you got?
No, this is more of a just a long title.
A long title. You got me. What is it?
Van den Plas's The Empyrean Equation of the Long Lost Things. I really like this album. Van den Plas has always been, I think, consistent, but it's always been a matter of like, do I really like the album or do I just kind of like the album? And this was just one that I really liked. It's again, like, this is a band that has never really reinvented their own wheel, so to speak. But I thought they really nailed it on this one. I feel like I enjoyed this album quite a bit more than the last handful. I just really liked it, and I'm excited to see them at Prague Power next year.
I love this band live. I'm so excited to not only see them, but sponsor them at Prague Power. And yet this album is not on my list. And I say that because it was fine, but I don't know that it was so markedly different from some of their other more recent releases that it just didn't resonate with me. And I actually listened to it today, as a matter of fact. I wanted to give it one last shot before I, went to press, if you will. And it just didn't hit home for me. I look forward to seeing the material live. I'm sure it'll be great. And maybe I'm just such a huge fan of the band that I think I hold them to a higher caliber of album at this point. But I just thought it was good. It's not on my list.
Okay, cool. Next at number 23, I have Charlotte Wessel's The Obsession, which is kind of like her return to metal, because I think her previous solo albums had really more of an indie rock kind of vibe. And on this one, she brought back all of the ex-members of Delain that are no longer in the band. And not to mention Simone Simmons on the Dopamine track, Alyssa White Gloves on the Ode to the West Wind track. This was such an odd album because I feel like the songs constructed in totally different ways. Each song had nothing to do with the last one. But I, as a whole, I really, really enjoyed it. I loved hearing her voice laid down to metal tracks again. And even though Soft Revolution was a song that was from a previous album, they re-recorded it, and it's one of my favorite songs from those first two solo albums that she did. So that the fact that they added a remake of that really just kind of put this one over the top for me. I remember talking to you about this album when it first came out, and the two of us were a little bit perplexed because it was just really kind of all over the place. But I ended up really liking this after listening to it a bunch of times. And again, it's kind of like Kai Hansen leaves Helloween, starts Gamma Ray, Roland Grappo joins in, then he leaves, starts Master Plan. You start getting these like branches of more great bands. And I feel like we were so like shocked when Delain broke off, and we were like, now what's going to happen? And now we have like Delain is making some of the best music they've made in years, and Charlotte's doing her own thing with the ex-members of Delain. And if this is any indication, like we got like two really good bands now.
I could play a song from this album right now, and I would enjoy the hell out of it. But we're not doing top songs, generally speaking. We're doing top albums. And what takes me out of this release was the flow. Each track was just so different. And I am usually for variation and keeping the listener on their toes. I like that. But this was just hard for me. Like, I would listen to it in spurts. I'd listen to 2 songs. I'd stop. I'd listen to another 2 songs. But when I listened to the whole thing, I struggled with it. And so there was a period, I think it might have been in my list, early on, and then it just found its way off of it pretty quickly. But
Fair
again,
enough.
I would enjoy listening to all this stuff live. There are good songs on here.
Yep. I've always been a big fan of hers, and so it's nice to hear her. As much as I enjoyed the indie rock stuff, like this is, I feel like a little bit more of the type of music I want to hear her sing. So I was glad to hear that this album. I believe Glenn had it on his list too. And when you talk about lists that are nowhere near close to one another, mine and Glenn Harveston's could not be more different. But that was one of the very few overlaps.
You had Van den Plas as well, so you're actually
okay. Cool.
Yeah.
All right, that might be where things end, though.
Yeah.
So, unless this next one, I can't remember. This next one might have been on his list. I think it might be on yours too. Inner Wishes, Ash of Eternal Flame, I thought was a band that I hadn't really listened to much of prior, and they have 5 albums prior to this, but this album really, it's kind of a late edition because it came out in November, but the last time I listened to it, it must have went up like 10 spots on my list. I just really liked it. The song with Hansi, Sea of Lies, is an absolute highlight, but the whole album is really strong, and it's got kind of that little bit more of like a crunchy, like kind of power metal vibe that like we used to expect from like a Brainstorm or even a Virgin Steel. It's like I wish Virgin Steel sounded like this. Sometimes the vocals remind me a little bit of Virgin Steel, but I thought this was a really good album that I probably wouldn't have gone out of my way to listen to if other people hadn't praised it, and I'm glad that I did because I liked it a lot.
A lot of people had high praise for this album. Power metal fans really went crazy for it because it was power metal with balls, which is not something you always get. It's not on my list. I thought there were better power metal albums this year. And so our lists are very different this year. I can already see that. Normally we get quite a bit of overlap. Even half of your list would be on mine in some form or fashion. It's not that I didn't enjoy The Inner Wish. That Blind Guardian, or crossover track is really good. The album is good, but there's other power metal albums, not a whole ton, but a handful of them that I just found better, and they found their way onto my list.
I would be shocked if there are even 5 albums that we both have in our top 25. I'm just saying that right now.
Wow.
So,
well, that makes it all the more interesting.
Well, 4 down, and we have no matches. Based on the fact I didn't hear you say a ton about this next album, I'm going to assume it's not on your list either. And it was actually, this one was very divisive. I heard people that called this their disappointment of the year. I really liked it. Bruce Dickinson's The Mandrake Project. I wish Iron Maiden's last 4 albums were this good. I mean, I really like this, and it had some really varied sound to it. That one track, I believe it was Resurrection Men, where it was like had that kind of Old West kind of feel.
That's a great tune.
I was here for this whole album. I enjoyed this so much. Like, just like the production, while not great, is still better than miles ahead of Senjutsu or whatever the hell the last Maiden album was called. Ninjutsu, or is that what the Ninja Turtles practice? Every song in this album, I was like waiting to figure out where the ball drops, because there were people that really didn't like this, and I get it. Like, I doubt it will compare to like the great Bruce Dickinson solo albums, but I don't really know them that well outside of the one that we, talked about, which I believe was Accident of Birth, which I really enjoyed. But I mean, I'll tell you, one of the things that I really liked about this album, though, is that there were parts of it that like I wouldn't be shocked if someone said John Oliva sat in on this production, because there was like some old school Sabotage-esque riffs going on. I mean, there were times where I was just like, especially the very first track, Afterglow of Ragnarok, the riffs were like Hall of the Mountain King-esque Sabotage. It was such a weird thing to hear in a Bruce Dickinson solo album. But man, I really like this album. I get like, longtime fans of Bruce and Maiden are like probably listen to him like, yeah, he's made better albums, but like, I'm not really using that as a comparison point. I just really liked it.
Yeah, he's made better albums. I liked Accident of Birth. I love The Chemical Wedding. And this album had some great tracks. The one you mentioned in particular, I fondly remember. So that should tell you that it's like ingrained in my head. But then there were other songs that I was like, it's okay. It sounds like it could have been on a recent Iron Maiden album. And I wanted something a little bit different. A very divisive album. You either loved it or hated it. I don't know that I hated it, but I definitely didn't love it.
I think I saw more people say that they were disappointed by it than that they said that they loved it. But every time I listened to it, like I liked it even a little bit more than the last time. So yeah, I was a fan. This next one's gonna piss off people. This next number 20 is going to really get some people angry. But I'll tell you what, I'm gonna give a shout out to I believe, you know what? I'm going to make sure I look up his name on Facebook so I don't say the wrong person and then look like an asshole. But I'll find it. But in the meantime, I'll just reveal this choice. Yes, it was Justin Gaines. He had as his number one album of the year, and mind you, most of his albums on this list were metal albums. His number one album of the year was Green Day's Saviors album. And this is what I have at number 20. I've never been shy about my fandom for this band, but boy, did I hate their last record. I really did not enjoy it. It was called, I believe it was that the one, Father of All Mother Effers. Yeah, that was the last one, and it was like they tried to like channel this pop punk kind of thing. I guess like most people would probably say that's what they are anyway, but like this was like a little bit too indie pop. I just didn't care for it at all. Just didn't work for me. Saviors was like a return back to the 21st Century Breakdown kind of. That's the album that reminds me the most of. I just enjoyed the crap out of it every time that I listened to it. And I know there's a lot of people that are going to like probably never listen to anything I have to say ever again, but oh my God, trust me, it's gonna get worse before it gets better. But I just enjoyed the hell out of this, and so really happy that Green Day decided to kind of go back, not necessarily to their roots, but to like 15, 16 years ago, because they really kind of lost me with the very bloated Uno Dos Tre trilogy, and then the two albums that followed. This one really feels like a little bit more of a classic Green Day album.
I hated the albums you just mentioned, but I did enjoy this one. It's on my honorable mention list. So it just missed the cut. It was a fun listen, and it brought me back in time, and it was a palate cleanser for the stuff they had been releasing, years prior. So that's a good thing. That song 1981 is a really stuck with me. I thought that was one of the better tunes on the album. So we're getting warmer because this one was at least on my radar.
Okay, number 19 is another album that I feel like a lot of people gave a lot of praise to, but like it's kind of funny. Remember how I said Nightwish at number 19 years back was like a disappointment because it was a Nightwish album ranked so low? This was a band that had my album of the year a couple of years ago, and that was Unleash the Archers. Abyss was my album of the year. Phantoma, good album, really good album. I enjoyed it a lot, but I was expecting another, top 3, top 5, something like that. And my issue with this album is that it just takes too long to get going. Like, I feel like Green and Glass, which is the 5th track, is where I think the album really starts to kick into full gear. And so it's still a really good album. Some of my favorite power metal songs of the year are on this album, but it just overall didn't carry the day the way Abyss did. Like, there was something about that album where start to finish, I was absolutely gripped. I knew probably the second time I listened to Abyss that it was my album of the year, and it never faltered. It was probably the last time I actually felt like confident about an album of the year, for most of the year. So I have to call this at least a small disappointment, but I still really like the album. I certainly like it a lot more than Nightwish's Human Nature, which was ranked at number 19 4 years ago. But there's some really good stuff on here, but it's just takes a little while to get going. It's one of the things I noticed the first time I heard it, and I felt that way each subsequent listen.
Disappointing. I did not enjoy this album as much as I wanted to, because you mentioned it. Their last album, a home run from the first note onto the very end of the album. This took too long to get going, and I don't want to wait half of an album to actually start really enjoying the music. Now, that being said, I plan on seeing them live on 70,000 Tons in about 3 weeks, and I want them to play some of this material because maybe it'll breathe life into the album for me. But this was a miss, and I had high hopes for it, and it just never met those expectations.
All right, we're doing good. All right, here's one that might have made your list. I'm not 100% sure, but possibly. Simone Simmons' solo album, her very first solo album, Vermilion. This was an album that she worked on with Arjen Lucassen of Arion fame. I mean, I think I said it in previous episodes. This is it's basically an Arion album with Simone singing, and that's really all I needed to hear. I love Arjen. He has that kind of quirky, proggy kind of sound to it, and Simone's voice is just wonderful. So this one was more of like, I just enjoyed the whole thing start to finish. I don't know that there was any tracks that really stood out more than others, but it was just a really enjoyable start to finish experience. So yeah, I like this one quite a bit.
If we were doing this exercise on Thanksgiving Day, it would have been on my list. It was on there for a while, but there was some stuff that I heard late in the year that bumped things down a little bit, or one or two albums that even got released in December, which just floored me. And I'll get to those when the time is right. So not on my list, honorable mention, a very enjoyable listen and a marriage of two different sounds, which I love, namely Arion and her vocals, but it just missed the cut.
Okay, next we have number 17. I don't know. Do we have a biggest surprise of the year category?
Yes, we do. We do.
Well, I'm going to give mine away now. It's Timeless Fairy Tales, A Story to Tell. This came out of absolutely nowhere, in my opinion. There was I didn't know this was a band. They never did anything before this. I just heard that there was an album that Henrik Brockman, former vocalist of Royal Hunt, was a part of. So I listened to it, and I must not have been paying very close attention, because by the second track, I thought I was listening to Royal Hunt. It was like, do you remember who was the band we used to joke about that was like the Blind Guardian clones?
Savage Circus.
Savage Circus. Timeless Fairy Tale is to Royal Hunt as Savage Circus is to Blind Guardian.
If that was on the SATs, I would have gone to Princeton, but unfortunately it wasn't on the test. But I agree with you. What number is this? I'm just curious.
17.
I have this at number 24. This is in my top 25. We've got a match, ladies and gentlemen.
Woohoo!
This album, I was the one that told you have to listen to this, because I know how much you like those early Royal Hunt albums. This was a amazing album, and I would almost argue it's maybe the best Royal Hunt album since Paradox. I mean, that's how much I like this thing. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but this was really good.
If you're gonna sit here and tell me that Andre Anderson had nothing to do with this album, I'm honestly in complete shock. Everything about this album screams Royal Hunt. The female backing vocals, the layered lead vocals, the keyboards, the tone of the guitars, like everything. It's insane. And then, all right, also the singer happened to be in Royal Hunt for 2 albums and before DC Cooper. I mean, holy shit, this is just like, wow. I mean, just really blew me away.
The complaint that I have, if I'm nitpicking, is I thought the production was lacking just a little bit. If it sounded as good as some of those Royal Hunt albums, it might have even been higher on my list. But I
think that's kind of the charm of it. It sounds like Cloud in the Mirror,
yeah. Well, to that end, you're right, and I appreciate that the songs were great. So we've got a match. So we're cooking now. This was I thoroughly enjoyed this. Not only did I enjoy it, but it was in my top 25 as well.
All right, so number 16 is a band I know you love, and I'm just going to predict that you don't have them on your list, and I'll tell you why I think that. The band is Eclipse. The album is Megalomanium 2, and the reason I don't think they're on your list is because I feel like every time they don't release Bleed and Scream, you just immediately say, this is not my Eclipse, and you don't put them on your list. But I don't care. This band has consistently makes great albums. Some are a little bit better than others, but I'd be shocked if I went back and started ranking like albums every year. I feel like they would make my top 25 every year that they released an album since Bleed and Scream. I just think that they're that consistent. I just enjoy the hell out of it. It's just the type of music I really like. Last year we had that Crown album that I think both floored the both of us. I think we both had that in our top 5. This is not quite that good.
No, it is not. No.
But it's still, I think, a very good album. I just enjoy everything they do. It's almost like a poppy melodic rock kind of vibe that, like, all the Frontiers bands, they have their sound, but Eclipse almost like brings in a little bit of like that, like, I don't know if you want to call it like Coldplay or U2, just there's a little bit of like a mainstream kind of poppiness to it that just works for me. So every time I listen to one of their albums, I'm like, this is okay. And then I go back and I listen to it again and again and again, and then it just keeps going up the ladder. And so this is where it lands for me this year. I'm sure Megalomanium 1 was on my list the year that came out too, but I'm just assuming that it's not on yours.
That's correct. Not because it was not Bleed and Scream 2. I just thought it was a good album that I listened to a few times, and, that was it. I will be right next to you at Prague Power when they're playing. I'm looking forward to their set, and if they play stuff off of this album, I'm not going to be offended. I look forward to hearing it. It's just I think they've lost a little bit of their edge or a little bit of that rawness that was on. I mean, they always had a very polished production, don't get me wrong, but there was a little bit more of a metal vibe to some of that earlier stuff, and they've gone more in a poppier or radio-friendly direction, and that's fine. Give me the balls of some of those older albums. Yeah,
well, we'll let Crown handle that. I'm really excited for their next album, whenever the hell that is supposed to come out, because that's one of the, at the time, that was a big surprise. Speaking of which, another debut album that I really enjoyed and I'm happy to see are going to be playing at Prague Power next year, Ares Descendant, From the Ashes of Deceit. This is like it's kind of like a symphonic power metal sort of thing. It's in the vein of Pure Maze, which makes sense because Jonah Weingarten, keyboardist of Pure Maze, is the one of the two driving forces of this album, along with Nicholas Sane, who's the vocalist. And all I could think of when I listen to this album is this is like if Avenged Sevenfold made a symphonic metal album, because I feel like Nicholas's vocals are very M Shadows-esque, and I just thought this was so catchy. Again, another Frontiers album, but it's interesting sometimes when like bands get announced for festivals and you're like, well, does this band have any material yet? When they were announced for Prague Power, I'm not sure if this album had come out yet. It was probably pretty close. It came out on October 18th. So clearly Milton had heard it because I think he was impressed enough to book them as his opener on day 2. And I'm glad that he did. I'm excited to hear how this sounds. But I feel like symphonic power metal is kind of it's kind of like a lost genre in a lot of ways. We're always like looking to see who's going to take the mantle to be the next Rhapsody. It seems like Twilight Force might have been that band. They were my album of the year last year, but I like this a lot. I think this is showing that there's a lot of promise with this band going forward.
I was not familiar with this band until like right before the album came out. Like a week, I feel like the album came out like a week before the announcement that they were playing the festival, sometime in October. And I didn't know what to expect because I didn't know who they were or what was on it. And then obviously I quickly realized who was playing on it. And I was like, anything in that Pure Maze vein, I'm all in on. It's melodic, it's heavy. It has great symphonic elements. The production is good. It was just a really pleasant surprise. I have it at number 25 on my list. So you, I think, have it at 15. I have it at 25. So we're in lockstep on this. This was a very, very good album.
I feel like I need to go back and listen to like those Defecto albums that Nicholas was the vocalist on, because I had no idea. I just didn't know who this guy was, and I really like his vocals. I think it's unique in the like more underground metal world. Not so unique if you're a fan of Avenged Sevenfold, who's a more, popular metal band, I guess, or more well-known band. But yeah, I thought this was really cool.
Those Defecto albums are amazing, and it's something that we should definitely cover on the podcast. In fact, one of their albums in particular, and I won't tell you which one because at some point I'm sure I'll choose it, I absolutely, positively love, and I hope we can cover it soon. It's just, though there's some really good stuff there.
Well, if you thought that the Green Day pick was ridiculous, wait until you hear what
Taylor Swift.
Number 14 album is. I do not have Taylor Swift did not make my list, but she made a lot of people's lists that are diehard metal fans. So that's why I don't feel too bad about making my number 14 album, The Offspring's Supercharged. Again, kind of echoing what I said about Green Day, is a band that hadn't released an album that got me excited in a long time. And part of the reason is that they kind of really started letting a lot of time pass in between releases, but this is probably my favorite Offspring album since possibly the 90s, honestly. It is a complete return to the old school, like punky, not as gimmicky, I don't know. Like the first time I listened to this album, I was like, wait a minute, why am I enjoying this so much? Like I really wasn't expecting to love it. I had listened to Collective Soul's new album this year, Soul Asylum's new album this year. Neither one of them, I think, even made it into my top 50. But this, for whatever reason, it brought back that love that I have for the Offspring. It's only a 32-minute album. It's an EP according to Dream Theater. I just enjoyed the hell out of this. I think I told anybody who would listen that I thought gave a shit to listen to this album, because I really thought this was a return to the Offspring that I grew up loving. Just a really fun album.
I didn't listen to it, so I need to go back and check it out. Sounds like I'm missing out, and I'll give it a shot.
Cool. That's all I ask.
What are we up to now? Number 13?
Yes, lucky number 13. This is another album that I feel like I saw like on a lot of people's lists, and then I saw just completely not on people's lists. But I like this one quite a bit, and it's a band that just does not consistently release albums that are like well received in the last, 15 years. And I'm talking about Sonata Arctica. I thought Clear Cold Beyond was their best album in a long time. I kind of hate the whole return to form thing, because this is not your Ecliptica's, Sonata Arctica, but it is, I think, akin to Pariah's Child, which came out 10 years prior, which I think was also kind of felt as like they were embracing the power metal a little bit more than they had been. And I feel like since Pariah's Child, they hadn't. And I feel like with this one, they kind of brought it back. I'm not going to sit here and say that like it's one of the best Sonata Arctica albums or whatever, but I enjoyed it a lot. And again, it was like one of those things where the more I listened to it, the more I enjoyed it. And I didn't feel like there were any like weird lulls or like, I don't know, like arty, like just, I don't know. It just felt like a straight up metal album, which they haven't really done a great job at releasing consistently.
I think this is the best Sonata Arctica album probably in the last 20 years. It wasn't perfect, but there were callbacks to some of those early albums in spots or in certain cases on certain songs, maybe 3 or 4 songs that really just brought me back in time and said, this is why I love this band so much around the turn of the century. It's not on my list. It's an honorable mention. It was a little unbalanced, but there was enough there that made me smile. So I understand why you liked it. It was, I'll just use the phrase. It was a return to form in that I enjoyed it much more than I have the recent albums.
It was a return to form for you, not the band, maybe.
There you go. Exactly.
And my next album at number 12 is another one that I feel like I heard a lot of people, maybe not a lot, but I heard some people say they didn't love it. This is another one I think I had in common with Glenn. Devin Townsend's Power Nerd album. This was another one where like Devin Townsend's usually, his stuff is like okay, I'm gonna have to listen to this 4 or 5 times before it makes any sort of sense to me whatsoever. I love this album the first time I listened to it. It was so accessible to me, and I just every time I listen to it, it just has this grandiose like feeling, and it just felt like good when I listened to it. The song "Gratitude" is absolutely just a wonderfully like uplifting track, and then like it ends with with this goofy ass song about coffee that is a lot of fun. But I really like this album, and again, like I don't know Devin Townsend's back catalog nearly as well as a lot of people do, so I'm not gonna like kind of sit here and say like, oh, it wasn't as good as Ziltoid or whatever. I just liked it for what it was. I thought it was really enjoyable, and I have come full circle on Devin Townsend from a guy that I only knew as some lunatic at Prog Power 3 who literally first thing he said was, "I just farted," before they even played a song. And like, I've come to really appreciate and love Devin Townsend. This album's phenomenal, and literally this album will sell a ticket to me when Devin Townsend comes to Raleigh, because I won't be able to just miss. I wouldn't be able to forgive myself if I missed seeing Devin play in my hometown. So yeah, I like this one a lot.
And he's the consummate showman, so I totally understand that.
And he just farted.
And he did. On this album, I think it was a little more straightforward than some of the albums he's been doing lately, and that's not bad or good. It's just an observation. The album just never clicked for me, and I listened to it at least 3 times, and I just was waiting for it. There were certain things I liked about it, certain tracks. I know others that loved the album, but for my money, I'd rather listen to him do other stuff. It wasn't a favorite of mine. Not bad, just not on my list.
Okay. We move on to number 11. I want to say you were the one who told me about this band. Another debut album. This one is from a Italian and Japanese band called Violet Eternal. They released a debut album called Reload the Violet. It has Ivan Giannini, who's the singer for Dirtian. He was also he sang for Vision Divine for a time, and Jian Takahashi on guitar. This is just like a straight up like fast paced power metal album that I just enjoyed the hell out of it the first time I heard it, and every other time I heard it. I thought it was great.
I have this on my list, albeit further down at number 46. This thing came out of nowhere. I didn't know about it. I just kind of saw it. I heard it was power metal. I gave it a listen. It's wild. It's fast. It's heavy in spots. And it was kind of a reminder that like when power metal is done right, I can still enjoy it. So I appreciated it just for that. And I actually remarked in my notes, like this was refreshing in many ways. Not my favorite album, but it was an interesting collaboration and it deserved a spot on the list. So I'm glad you enjoyed it as much as you did.
Yeah, very good stuff. I'll stick to the power metal genre, at least for the next 2 albums. Number 10, Frozen Crown's War Hearts. I remember saying last year that Call of the North was a little bit on the disappointing side. I was expecting a little bit more. I felt like the band had been like getting a little bit better with each album. And that one, I just didn't really love it. And this one, I think, was what I was hoping for. Steel and Gold, one of my favorite tracks of the year. They played it when we saw them at Prog Power, so I think it has a little bit of a kind of special place in my heart. Now when I hear it again, I just think of how great they were with their set at Prog Power. The addition of Alessia as their third guitar player had the potential to make things sound crowded, and instead they managed to figure out a way to make it sound really clean and unique, and it worked live. It works on this album. I thought this was their best album. It might be their best album yet. I just really enjoyed this a lot. I believe our friend Charles had it pretty high on his list as well.
I can totally understand why you liked it. I thought it was much better than their prior album as well. I just compare it to some other things on my list, and it didn't make the mark. But I do have some power metal that's pretty high up, and I'm wondering. I know you're going to go back to power metal at I think it's number 9 or number 8. I'm wondering if there's overlap, that the power metal albums that I love this year, if they're going to be the same as yours.
We'll soon find out. I'm running out of albums at this point, but at number 9, I have Fellowships, The Skies Above Eternity. This is their second album. They also have a couple EPs, but this is their second full-length album, and this is, I think, the band to watch as far as symphonic power metal or up-and-coming symphonic power metal bands, because this is what I want to hear. Just really, like, you know, kind of that Twilight Force kind of like, it's not as symphonic and dragony and stuff, but it's just very like straightforward, fast paced. I really enjoyed their debut album, The Saberlight Chronicles. I'm pretty sure it was in my top 25 in 2022, and they're just moving on up, cause they're in my top 10 this year. This is just the kind of stuff that warms my cold heart. So, cheers to Fellowship for a really good, sophomore album.
This is my power metal album of the year. I adored this album. The first time I heard it, I was blown away. And then I just enjoyed it with each and every listen. Now, to be clear, pretty sure I got a cavity from this one, because it is very, very sweet. This is not Inner Wish like we were talking about earlier, but it's so well done, and it sounds so clean and well produced that it just puts a smile on my face. It's happy power metal, but I'll be damned if they didn't do a great job. It's number 8 on my list. So I actually had it higher up than you, which I think is a real testament to how good this album is. And it may be the highest album that we have in common. It's definitely possible. I don't know what you have in store, but fantastic release.
We might have one that is even higher, but we'll get there. Number 8 might have been the first album I listened to in 2024, and I loved it then, and I love it now. Exit Eden's Femme Fatale. This was their second full-length album. Yes. But their first one without Amanda Somerville, and I was a little worried that losing Amanda Somerville, who I think probably was the most well-traveled of the 4 vocalists, most experienced. I was worried that, it wasn't going to live up to that first album that I really enjoyed quite a bit back in 2017, Rhapsodies in Black. This was an all covers album. This new album is actually half covers, half original tracks, and one of the original tracks is a song called Run featuring Marco, ex Nightwish, and this is one of my favorite songs of the year, by far. I love anytime I get to hear Marco's voice. He's actually got an album coming out in early 2025 that I'm looking forward to hearing. But the covers on this are phenomenal. It's a Sin from Pet Shop Boys, Separate Ways from Journey, Poison from Alice Cooper, Alone, by I-10, K-Leaf, a Marillion cover. I thought that was rather surprising. But also my cover of the year was on this album, Desenchante. My French really needs some work, which is a Mylene Farmer cover. It's a song I legitimately had never heard of in my entire life. It was for the longest time my favorite song of the entire year. Was unseated. And I think I'd mentioned it when the album came out. Like, I am not usually a big fan of songs that are sung in foreign languages, because I feel like not knowing what they're saying takes me out of it a little bit. But this is an absolute symphonic metal masterpiece of a cover. I absolutely love it. I just thought the album overall was a blast. Big fan of Marina LaTarraca, who is also the lead singer of Phantom Elite. I want to say that Clementine Delany was kind of like the main singer on this, but and not to be outdone, Anna Brunner, also the third vocalist. Yeah, I like this one a lot. So this one came out on January 12th, and it was just, I went back to it all, like, the whole year. Like, every now and again, I'd be like, hadn't listened to Eggs and Eden in a while. So cheers to them for really, this could have been kind of a bomb after Amanda left, but the original songs were great. The covers were great. Great album.
This was very high on my list early on, and it just slowly moved down over time, and I went back to it, I don't know, beginning of the fourth quarter, and I loved it even then. But as it was going down on my list, it got pushed out for no other reason than it was just too many covers, and I tried to limit it to original material, and I think if it had maybe 2 or 3 more original songs and 1 or 2 less covers, I think it would have probably held on, even though I like the covers. But I tried to give credit to the artists that were doing their own material. So this wound up being on my honorable mention list. But for the longest time, it was in the top 50. And I understand completely why you loved it, because it is really, really a solid release. And there's no bad songs on there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree what you're saying regarding the covers. But I mean, hearing 3 women sing Pet Shop Boys songs sounds so unlike the original that it almost doesn't even feel like a cover. So I don't know. That's kind of how I felt about it. Also love when anybody covers Alice Cooper's Poison. Didn't Powerwolf cover that not that long ago also?
They might have. I think they did.
Well, sticking to the bands I liked in the 90s that made their best album in years, as far as I'm concerned. Number 7 goes to Pearl Jam's Dark Matter album that, I don't know what's up with Pearl Jam, or what was up with Pearl Jam. After the self-titled album from 2006, I just was not that impressed with anything that they had done, since then. I'm a huge fan of this band. Backspacer was just okay for me. I actually remember, like, Glenn had it on his list that year, and I was like, man, of all the years to put Pearl Jam on your list, like, that one didn't really do a ton for me. Lightning Bolt, I thought, was a little bit better. Then Gigaton, they kind of lost me again. This is the best Pearl Jam album for me in almost 20 years. It's kind of hard to explain why. It does have a little bit more, a little more balls to it than the last few albums felt like they were kind of getting a little soft. Like that self-titled album in 2006, they were pissed off and they let everybody know. And I missed that kind of Pearl Jam. Like, I want an angry Pearl Jam is an enjoyable Pearl Jam as far as I'm concerned. But this was one of those albums where I was like waiting for the bottom to fall out, and it just never did. Like, start to finish, I just enjoyed the hell out of this. And I look forward to seeing them this year, because I have not seen them since this album came out. So I've not heard any of these songs performed live. But really good stuff. I know a lot of people that listen to our podcast could give 2 shits, but I just enjoyed this album a lot. And I feel like, I was almost worried that it was going to become like a Nightwish thing where, like, I was never going to love a Pearl Jam album again. And they proved me wrong. So, they're all, I think, if they're not 60, they're approaching 60, but it's refreshing to see they still have something like this in them.
I liked it too. I thought it was one of their best, maybe the best album they've done in a long time. You said 20 years. I think that's accurate. Maybe even a little more. I enjoyed this quite a bit. And for a while, it was on my top 50 list. It ultimately got pushed out, so it's not on there. It gave way to other things. But I understand the appeal here. This was a very good album.
Very good. Next, we are at number 6. This is an album that, like, slowly climbed throughout the year. And then the last time I listened to it, I was like, God damn. This album was great, and the album is New Horizons Conquerors album. This was the second album from Jonah T of Crown fame, who we mentioned earlier, and also Heat as well. 2 bands that we're both big fans of. He had done the debut album with Eric Gronwall, who another guy whose name is mentioned often on this podcast. And on the second album, Conquerors, they brought in Nils Moland of Amaranth and Dynasty fame. And I think a lot of people were, wondering, is this going to be as good as the first album with a different vocalist? And I liked it when I first heard it. And then I liked it a little bit more. And then I kept listening to it. And it just, every time I heard it, it just has that Frontiers melodic metal sound, but like there's like a little bit more aggressiveness to it. And it really, it feels like a really big production. And I really like that. It sounds really good. I feel like with Amaranth, you kind of forget how powerful of a vocalist Nils can be. I really like this one. I'm curious to see what you thought of it. But I thought that like this was all the songs were great, and I thought they did a hell of a cover of Iron Maiden's Alexander the Great to finish things up.
I agree with you that Nils's vocals in Amaranth leave something to be desired because they don't let him shine as much as Dynasty does, or especially in a live setting. I don't know that I liked it as much as the debut album, but I liked it a lot. I thought that I'll say this. I don't think every song was great. I thought that there were some songs that were a little meh, but there were some songs that were just absolutely fantastic. And so on the whole, I liked the album a lot. It was melodic. It was top-notch vocals in terms of the performance. And I liked that every song sounded different. I echo your sentiments with regard to the Alexander the Great cover. So it's on my list. It's not as high as yours. I have it at number 40. I think Charles Florio, one of our Patreon members, loved this album, if I'm not mistaken. Shout out to Charles. I can see why. There are things that you can sink your teeth into here, and you could do a lot worse. So it made my list. I don't think I gave it as high a score as you, but well-deserved on both lists.
We don't have an award for label of the year, but I think Frontiers would be mine, just based on a lot of these selections that I've made. Number 5 is a band that could have been on Frontiers. I don't think anybody would question it. They're actually on Napalm Records. Kissin' Dynamite, back with a bang. The first time I listened to this album, all I could think of is I don't like this as much as Not the End of the Road, which was very high on my list 2 years ago. But the more I listened to it, this band is becoming one of my bucket list bands. I have to see this band live because their music is so infectious and it's so fun. And there's just something, every time I listen to them, I just get so sucked in. The Best Is Yet to Come is a song that I need to listen to more often because I need that kind of positive reinforcement on a day-to-day basis. And I need to be reminded. And again, this is another one of those albums that I think that I, probably plopped somewhere in like around the 25 or 30 area, and then I would go back to it, and then it would just keep jumping up the list. And this is where it landed, man. I listened to it one last time the other day, and I had it playing on my HomePod in the living room while I was like making lunch, and I was just dancing around the kitchen. Like it's just such a feel good album. There's an album that made me feel even better coming up, but this one was just an absolute blast. I thank you for introducing me to this band because they are just a joy, like just a joy to listen to. And I'm hoping that maybe at Glenn's final Prog Power, he can bring these guys over. Or if they do a US tour, whatever, I'll go. Like I'm down to see this band. I love it. It's just my kind of shit. And, I love it.
When you get a chance, next time you see Tyler Scode, shout out to Tyler, ask him his thoughts on seeing this band live with me on 70,000 Tons. I'll leave that story for another time, but I have seen them live. I've seen them live twice. They are a fun time. I thought this album was much better than the last release. I think that some of their older albums are better, but I can understand the appeal of this one. Some really standout tracks on this as well. I love that song Back with a Bang. I think it was just the title track was fantastic. It's on my honorable mention list. It was I struggled with this one. I wanted to put it on the top 50, but ultimately it didn't make the cut. But I would love to see them live again. I'll just say that.
Beautiful. All right, number 4. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say this is gonna be our highest ranked album collectively, and it's Cemetery Skyline's Nordic Gothic. Wow. Again, another band that like released one album and got themselves onto the Prog Power lineup. And I would have booked them at Prog Power based on the first 3 singles that came out before the album was even released, but the whole album completely stands up. Michael Stane, who we mentioned quite a bit in the last couple of years because of his involvement in both Dark Tranquillity and the
Halo Effect,
and the Halo Effect, who have an album that came out today, as a matter of fact, at the time of recording. I didn't know what to expect to hearing that he was going to do like an album of full cleans, but this guy is like an 80s gothic, like just, I don't know where, I can't put my finger on what his vocals remind me of on this album, but the hooks on these songs, it's such a good album, start to finish. In Darkness, one of my favorite songs of the entire year. This album was out of this world, and I feel like it was on a lot of people's lists. I don't know who would have seen this coming. It was like it was almost like the return of Typo Negative, but it almost had a little bit more of like a kind of an 80s pop, like an 80s new wave kind of vibe to it. It hit all the notes that I wanted it to hit. It really was an absolute surprise for me. I love this album, and every time I listened to it, it was just a joy for me.
You nailed the description. Typo Negative meets 80s new wave with a little bit of like synth pop thrown in there for good measure. I think it was my most listened to album of the year. I just kept going back to this over and over again, and I found it to be such an easy listen. And I found it an easy listen because I could listen to it in a number of settings. I listened to it with my earphones on. I listened to it in the car. I listened to it in my office because I didn't think people would find it like overly offensive. It's not that easy when I'm playing Blackwater Park in my office and people are like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Why did we hire you? But like, this was not as offensive to people. The melodies on this album are just absolutely infectious. Absolutely infectious. And I cannot wait to see them live at Prog Power. It was nearly my album of the year. I eventually went in another direction, but for an album that hit me a little bit higher with certain things, and I'll explain it when I listen to it. But it's debatable. It's my number 2 album of the year. It just missed being number 1.
We give it the Crown Award for 2024.
There you go. I think
that was our highest collective choice last year. Number 3. This is an album that I really didn't even want to put on this list at all because this band has made the same album over and over and over again. But the album is so good over and over and over again that I can't help but love it. Powerwolf's "Wake Up the Wicked." They're not. Saying what I said about Vanderplas, they are not reinventing their own wheel at all. But these songs are just so catchy and enjoyable. What they do so well. Joan of Arc, and 1589, two of my favorite songs of the year. It's just I don't know what it is about this band. It just works for me. They really don't do anything all that like different from previous albums, but they get me every goddamn time.
This was the first time that they released an album where I was like, all right, I can't wait to hear this. Because if you remember, I was not a fan of this band for a very long time, or at least I never quite got it. And then I saw them live. I'm like, all right, I get it. This is really cool stuff. Good album. Not on my list. I didn't think it was infectiously catchy or anything like that. But if you told me to put it on right now, I'd enjoy the hell out of it. So I get it. I understand why it's high on your list. It's just, it didn't strike as high of a chord for me.
Number 2 is potentially my surprise of the year because I don't think that this band has sniffed my top 20 in years. And boy, did they just wake up. Freedom Call's Silver Romance. This is the best Freedom Call album I've heard I don't even know. I don't even want to look up their discography because I feel like it might be embarrassing how long it's been since I loved a Freedom Call album this much. But this is just vintage, like late 90s, early 2000s Freedom Call. Every song is absolutely infectious power metal. They have not forgotten their roots from the very first track, the title track, I was hooked. I was in. This was nearly my album of the year. I couldn't believe it. I could not believe that Freedom Call was like pulled this one out after all these years of just like, good albums, but not great albums. The only thing that would have shocked me more is if Hammerfall was my number 2 album of the year. And, it was not in my top 25, and I'm pretty sure it didn't come close to landing on the top 25, but boy, I enjoyed this a lot.
I feel, derelict in my duties as a co-host. I listened to this album a couple of times, and I guess I didn't spend enough time with it because it just never clicked for me. Like, I'm like, it was fine, and maybe I was listening with half an ear or something like that. So I give you my vow, I'm going to go back and listen to this very, very soon because I must have missed something. I just thought it was like another Freedom Call release, but I want to hear it again, so I'll listen to it this weekend.
Excellent.
Before we go to number 1, let me just say a couple of things.
Sure.
I am shocked that a handful of albums are not in your top 25. So there's only one left, and I think I can guess which one is there if I had to guess. But by guessing that album, there's 3 or 4 other albums that it's not, and it just it confounds me that it's not one of these albums. So I'm going to let you do the honors, and then I'll kind of give a little more color to my thought process. But there's 3 albums, I think, that could have been in this spot, and I'm shocked that that the other 2 are then not this album. So,
okay, I'm fascinated to hear like which albums you think I would have ranked this high.
Yes.
And I think I might have a clue, at least as to what one of them was, but we'll figure that out. But for me, the number 1 album this year was Alvalon's Ascending into Synergy. Do this, Nightwish. Like this is what I want. This is absolute symphonic power metal perfection. Just outstanding vocals. The piano riffs are so memorable. My song of the year is on this album. It's like a modern reimagination of Tarja era Nightwish, and I absolutely loved it. It kind of fell by the wayside for a little while. I went back and listened to it the last time I listened to it, and I was like, this has got to be it. This is my album of the year. There wasn't a lot of this style that really hit for me this year, but this one I thought they really hit right out of the park. I was happy to see some other people mention it as well. I felt for a little while that I was like on an island to myself with this one, but man, if you're a fan of like early Nightwish or just any sort of like just really symphonic classical style power metal, this I think is going to really hit all those notes for you. It did for me. I thought this was wonderful. Not actually their debut. They had one previous album called Until Dawn that came out in 2018, but this another sophomore album that just wow. I am really looking forward to seeing what else this band has to show, because this one really blew my socks off. And when we talk about our songs of the year, I will circle back to this.
Where do I start? When I gave you that preamble, this was the album of all the albums that I had in mind. So I'm still surprised that there are others that didn't make your list, and I'll mention those in due course. But when I heard this album for the first time, I said to myself a few things. 1, this is what I want Nightwish to sound like. 2, I'll be damned if Chris Nicchi doesn't love this album. I love this album. This album was everything I wanted from this style, and it was far and away. Well, I shouldn't say that. There was another album that I had high up in the same vein, and then this one just eclipsed it because it was that good. It's symphonic metal, but it's such high quality that even though the genre can feel a bit bloated, this doesn't have the bloat. Well-written songs, hooks galore, a great singer. the first listen I liked. The second listen blew me away. And I listened to it again a couple of weeks ago, and I'm like, oh yeah, this just hit all the spots for me. And I've listened to it a bunch of times since. I have it at number 5. I love this album. So I guess it's right up there with Cemetery Skyline, for tied for our album of the year as a collective. Really, really fantastic release. I'm dying to see this band live. I know Glenn liked this album a lot as well. This is what I want from my symphonic metal.
Yeah, I feel like we could put together a pretty good prog power roster with some of these bands, particularly Elvalon and Kiss and Dynamite for my own, selfish reasons. I'm glad that you enjoyed it as well. I thought wasn't sure if this was going to be one of those ones where you were going to just be like, "What the hell are you talking about?"
No, I'm totally on board. I even toyed with having it higher than 5 on my list. I didn't put it there, but I mean, at one point I said maybe this is my album of the year. I was toying with it. It never quite got there. But if you're at number 5, you did something right. So good list. I'm really, it's an eclectic mix. I'm glad you liked it. I think it does give me some time to say, what the hell, and how did you not listen to this, or how did you not love this? But I have some stuff on my list that I'm curious to know if you heard, what you thought of it, if you remember.
Is there anything not on your list that you thought would be on my list that wasn't?
Not on my list that I thought would be on your list. I'll mention some of my. I'll mention some albums that were either 26 to 50 on my list, because I'm not going to go into them in detail, or stuff that was on my honorable mention list that I was surprised you didn't have.
Perfect.
Some honorable mentions on my list. Terra Maze, Eli, A Wonderful Fall from Grace. I thought that had a chance of getting on your list. Let's see. Imperia, Dark Paradise. I thought that was another album that you might like. I think that was a Frontiers release. Firewind, Stand United. I thought this was the best Firewind album I've heard in a long, long time. All 3 of those are on my honorable mention list. I thought that there might be a shot of all 3 of those being on your list as well.
If not all of them, some of them will probably be in my top 50 once I figure out where. But I did enjoy all of the albums you just mentioned.
Caligula's Horse comes in on my list at number 44. I thought that there was a chance that would be on your list. It wasn't there. What else do we have? I thought
another top 50 candidate for sure for me.
Okay. DGM, Endless. I thought that there was a chance that you liked this. They went more of a
have them one rock spot ahead of Caligula's Horse.
Okay, so I'm getting warmer. And then Dendera's Mask of Lies. I thought that was going to be on your top 25 list as well. I have that at number 35. Striker, Ultra Power, I have at number 32. I thought that there was a pretty good chance that you had that one on your list as well. Other than that,
Striker just missed my top 25.
Okay. Very good. So those were just some notable albums that I thought you might particularly enjoy. And I'll kind of get into my list. Ares Descendant, 25. Timeless Fairy Tale, 24. At 23, I have Frost's Life in the Wires. This album suffered from a little bit of bloat. It was a very dense, long album. And had it come out maybe earlier in the year, I think I would have liked it even more. It might be their best album. I didn't have tremendous expectations, but this just blew me away. It's a beautiful album from start to finish, but you got to be in the right headspace for it because it is a long, dense release, but it's well produced and a good prog metal album. And I should note, there are a lot of good prog metal albums this year. Just from the macro sense, great year for prog metal. A little bit of a down year for melodic death metal. There were a handful of albums that I liked, but I didn't think it was a phenomenal year. Handful of power metal albums. I didn't think it was a phenomenal year. A couple of black metal albums that stood out, a couple of thrash metal albums, but by and large, I thought prog had a very strong year.
Nice. I only had a chance to listen to this album once, and I really liked it, but I think the length of it is what caused me to not go back and listen to it again. I will listen to it again because I did enjoy it. It's like in the periphery of like towards the end of my top 50, but I did enjoy this quite a bit, especially after we got to talk about one of their older albums in full on the podcast not that long ago.
Nice. Very good stuff. I should think it's also worth mentioning. I don't want to call my list a grouping tool, but in many ways, while I think that number 3 is markedly better than number 49, I don't think people should pay much mind to whether an album is 32 or 36. Like if you're there, you're in that vicinity, but like on a given day, could 36 be better than 32? Yeah, if I want to listen to thrash, the thrash album is going to sound better than the prog rock album. But by and large, I think you can draw wider conclusions from an album that's number 2 as opposed to an album that's number, 49, that kind of a thing. So I just wanted to put that caveat out there because I think my mood really does dictate some of this stuff. But as we get higher towards the top, there were, as the Macho Man said, the cream always rises to the top, and it certainly did on my list as well. An album that I absolutely adored. I didn't see this on many lists. It was number 22, Mother of Millions, Magna Mater. This was like Sleep Token, but on steroids. I kept going back to this album a lot. It is dense. It is atmospheric. It's oddly catchy and a slightly proggy. And quite frankly, unlike anything else you've ever heard, it's hard for me to even describe what this is. There's some pop elements. As I said, I get some Sleep Token, but without the offensive vocals that you probably don't enjoy. Did you have a chance to listen to this? Because I think you would love it.
I did not even know they had an album in 2024, so I missed this one completely.
More than anything else that I'm going to mention, you have to listen to this. I think you'll love it.
All right, cool.
If you listen to nothing else in my top 25, this is the one I think that you.
I'm shocked that you would compare a band to Sleep Token and then tell me that I would love it. So,
but you'll hear the elements, but it's not a carbon copy, and it's those other elements that I think you'll enjoy. But this was a great album. Number 21, the surprise melodic death metal album of the year for me. Orpheus Omega's Ember Glow. This is a band out of Melbourne, Australia that clearly listens to a lot of Scar Symmetry, but they do it well, and it's just the perfect blend of heaviness, melody, and hooks. This album, I listened to it, and I'm like, Justin Westmoreland is going to eat this thing up. That is what I think of this album, and I don't know that there was a melodic death metal album, with the exception of one other one that I'll mention later, but even that was a little bit different. This is more of standard melodic death metal. Good stuff. And I think there's a chance you'd like this one as well.
And speaking of Justin Westmoreland, we have him on the line. No, I'm just kidding. That was last week. I actually gave this album a listen, and I had no idea what to expect. I loved it. I thought it was great. It'll probably be in my top 50. This was one of my favorite melodic death metal albums of the year, if not my favorite. I am kind of scratching my head trying to think of some other ones that really stuck out for me, but this is like the style that I really enjoy. So thank you for recommending it.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Number 20, Rendezvous Point's Dream Chaser. If you like Vola, you have to listen to this album. It's that modern prog rock metal hybrid style, rich, lush keyboards, great melodies. And it was really a pleasant surprise to me, even though I was familiar with the band's earlier work. I just didn't expect to like this album as much as I did. But I'm a sucker for an earworm, and this album is chock full of them, so much that it made the top 20. Just a really fun, interesting listen. Are you familiar with this band at all?
Yeah, I listened to this album and I thought it was quite good. I definitely agree with the Vola comparison. I will have to go back and listen to this again. I think I only got a chance to listen to it once, but I did like it. I thought it was quite good.
Nice. Number 19, a band called I Was, Dark It Is. This was an album I loved immediately. Somebody had sent me one of their songs. I listened to it. I loved it. And then the album came out and it was great. It is a death doom metal hybrid. I think this is their first album. It's definitely a contender for debut album of the year, but for Cemetery Skyline. It's dark. It's heavy, but somehow retains the melody that some of these albums don't have, and I think that's why I liked it so much. This is a band to keep an eye on, and I hope that they put out some new material because I really enjoyed this album.
What's the name of the band?
Aiwaz, Aiwaz, and the album is called Dark, Darrkh. It is odd name, odd album, but I enjoyed the hell out of it. I went back to this quite a few times.
Okay, this one was completely off the radar for me, so
didn't even suggest it to you because I don't think you're going to like this one as much. But speaking
I'm surprised you put it on your list the way they spell dark that way.
I do. Well, that's why it's number 19 and not number 9, because I had to give them a demerit for the way they spelled it. But at number 18, Aquilus, Bellum Part 2. This was a black metal band that I loved, Bellum Part 1. This album was off. This album was on my list, got knocked off, and then I listened to it. I went back to it, and it came right back to the list. So it got knocked out, and then it got revived. It was like you put, when you raise the arm that 2 times, and then the third time you start like hulking up, and you never put it down that third time. That was this album. It's a lot to digest.
And then Chris Jericho pops up and goes, "You just made the list."
Exactly. And it's like there's a lot to digest here. It's kind of the perfect black metal album, but for prog metal fans that want to dip their toe into the black metal pool. It's a majestic journey with a diverse set of sounds. And I think the reason I liked it is because it doesn't beat you over the head with the black metal vocals. There's not that many vocals on the album to begin with, and it's really 2 long songs with a bunch of fluff around it. It's an interesting album. It's worth a listen. And, it's probably my black metal album of the year because it just combines all these other elements that kind of sucked me in. So that's Aquilus at number 18. Number 17 was an album that I thought was going to be on your list. It didn't make it, but I enjoyed it thoroughly. It's Vision Divine's Blood and Angels' Tears. It was a really good first listen, but by the time I got to it the second time, I was blown away by it. I think it's one of the top 3 or 4 power metal albums of the year with superb production. Shout out to Olaf Thorson, double alumna of the podcast at this point. A great album. You spoke about Ivan Giannini earlier. He's no longer in the band, but he does a great job on this album.
I didn't get to listen to this album as much as I would have liked. I think I only got to listen to it twice. It was I don't know why it took me so long to listen to it because it came out in September. So I had the time. I just didn't make the time. I didn't take the time, as Dream Theater would say. I liked it. I just didn't, I didn't get enough of a chance to really make it memorable. So I'm glad to see it high on your list. I'll have to revisit.
Listen, I mean, the reality is time is a valuable commodity, so I completely understand overlooking certain things. Like I said, I should have spent more time with the Freedom Call, apparently, so I can sympathize with you, and I get it. At number 16, a really pleasant surprise, a band that I've always enjoyed, but this album was great. It reminded me of Anathema in spots, and that's not a bad thing. And no, I'm not talking about Weather Systems. That is on my list at number 34. I'm talking about Alcest, and the album is called Les Chants del l'Error. I never really knew what shoegaze was as a genre, but then I heard somebody describe Alcest as shoegaze, so I have to hit more of that genre. This just hits all the different feelings, and I have no idea what the hell they're saying. So, for an album that's completely in French, I was on board with this. I thought this was a beautiful release.
What is shoegaze?
I don't know.
How do you describe it?
Go listen to Alcest, and apparently you have your answer.
Okay, I have a couple of tracks from their their older days. I haven't really heard anything pretty much in the last 10 years or so from them. So.
Well, it might be time. This album stood out amongst even its predecessors. Another album that was not on your list, which I was a little surprised at. The album is called Manifesto. The band is called Sunburst, and I'm not sure it's as good as the debut. I loved the Sunburst debut album a number of years ago, but this was still a very good release. It garnered a lot of high praise and with good reason. It's that perfect blend of technicality and melodic power metal, great production. And if you close your eyes, you would think there was a young Roy Khan on vocals. And so for that reason alone, it garners attention. Did you not enjoy it, or did you not spend enough time with it?
Somewhere Roy Khan is saying, "Hey, I thought I was young." I'm not even going to lie to you. I listened to this album today, and it literally was like right on the line at 25, and it got just shouldered out. It
got eclipsed by Eclipse.
Yeah, it very well might be like number 26 when it's all said and done. I liked it. I agree, though, I didn't like it as much as the debut, but it was still a really good album. It just got pushed out, but it was in the conversation.
Very good, completely understandable. Another melodic death metal album. I kind of went back and forth as to which one was better, but ultimately this one, I guess this one takes the prize. Michael Stane back again, and I guess he's my MVP of the year because, to be honest with you, I got Dark Tranquillity at number 14. The album is called End Time Signals. It wouldn't have made the list after the first listen, but by the time I listened to this a second time, it was practically in my top 10. Excellent album, one of Dark Tranquillity's best top to bottom, and I love the diversity on this. Every track was different, but unlike the Charlotte album, it seemed to flow a lot better for me. I really look forward to seeing these tracks live, and to his credit, he had 2 albums in the top 14, so if that doesn't make you my MVP of the year, the new Halo Effect does, because that's another
album. He was
awesome.
two weeks away from potentially having 3 bands in your top 25.
It was that good, and the new Halo Effect is amazing. So kudos to them. Did you have a chance to listen to this one, or did you not hear it?
I listened to it a couple of times. I thought it was good. It's not my favorite style in the world, but I definitely have a new appreciation for this band after seeing them live, and I think that I went into listening to this album with a different mindset because of that, and I ended up liking it. I didn't love it, but it's the thing is like it's like 12 songs of like this kind of like really kind of dark kind of style that I'm just kind of like, all right, I need Freedom Call, help.
Fair enough. We get closer to the top 10 at number 13. A band called The Aphelion. The album is called Nascence. This is like Pain of Salvation style prog metal. And at first I really didn't enjoy it, but I was kind of intrigued by it, so I kept listening and listening and listening. And then all of a sudden this thing just clicked and started shooting up my board. It is one of the most interesting albums of the year. There's a lot of brass instruments on it, and it's not the last time you'll hear brass instruments on an album. Or another album that I'll talk about later, but this is one of the most interesting releases of the year, and a band that's just somebody else to keep an eye on. I doubt you've heard the album, but have you heard of this Aphelion release?
No, I was not familiar with this. I'm not really even familiar with the band, so this one's going to be a new one for me.
Cool. Number 12, shout out to Sean the Metal Pigeon. I know he loved this album. It was in his list. Carmeria, Tragedy de Amor. This is the sophomore release from an Australian power metal band that's really channeling its inner Camelot. But with this second release, they have more robust songwriting, and I think they're trying to shed that like Camelot clone moniker. This was one of the better symphonic power metal albums of the year. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and there's a handful of tracks that I dare you not to listen to this and have these songs get stuck in your head. Excellent release. I think I even recommended that you give it a listen because I thought you'd really enjoy this.
It will be in my top 50 more than likely. I only got to listen to it one time and I enjoyed it, but I just didn't get to spend as much time with it as I would have liked. But I did enjoy it.
Nice. Number 11, just missing the top 10. One of, if not the last album on my list. It was close. But it came out, I think, in early December, but I just fell in love with it immediately. And I think I listened to it 3 or 4 times and I had to have it high up on the list because I want to keep going back to it. Of all the albums on the list, this is one of them that I definitely want more time with because I enjoyed every listen. The album is called Betrayal. The band is called Ethereal. A very late edition, great production, and each song has a lot of different character. There are elements of melodic death metal, doom metal, melodic metal, male vocals, female vocals. There's kind of something for everybody on this disc, and I think somehow it all works when you put it together. Like, it sounds like I'm describing a complete clusterfuck, but it's actually a really tight, cohesive album. I had never heard of this band. I think they were dormant for a number of years. This is a great album.
This is another one I'm not familiar with. I will definitely give it a listen. I thought your description was very intriguing.
Nice. I think there's potential here for you. And now we get into the top 10. This was one of the albums I was surprised that I alluded to earlier, that when you got to number 1, I knew something was getting cut. This was one of the ones I was surprised that you didn't have on your list, and it was Vola's album, Friend of a Phantom. Before I get into my explanation, did this just not click for you? Because I know you're a fan of the band.
I liked it, but if I learned anything about Vola, it's that I need to listen to their stuff a bunch of times, as I did when we listened to their entire discography prior to this album, in about 1 to 2 weeks. I liked it. It just, it didn't reach that, like, I loved it point. And I think it's just because I didn't get to listen to it enough. I think I listened to it 2 or 3 times and probably needed to listen to it a bit more, because like when I listen to Vola, I'm like, yeah, I'm liking this, but then like in the grand scheme of everything, it's like, there's just a lot of stuff that I would prefer to listen to, but that does not in any shape or form temper my excitement for seeing them live this year again. So yeah, this is definitely one I'm gonna go back to, and again, probably makes the top 50, just not the top 25.
It was a great year for prog metal, like I mentioned, and this band just doesn't disappoint. I will admit that it took a number of listens for it to click, though. I listened to this album a lot, and if you would have asked me after the third listen, was it going to make the top 50, the top 10, let alone the top 25 or the top 50, I would have probably said no, I'm disappointed. But as I listened to it more and more, it really grew on me. The production is great. The melodies are there. And in many ways, they're amongst the leaders of like this new wave of modern progressive metal. So great release by them. But unfortunately outdone by another prog metal album, Iatun's Kinship. This is a sophomore release after a really solid debut. And it's a big regret of mine that I did not get to see them on 70,000 Tons of Metal last year. I am dying to see this band again. This album has been hyped constantly by Carrie of MSRcast, and I understand why. This album exceeded every expectation, and when I pine for old Opeth, this is what I'm looking for. Easily a top 10 album. Heavy, dark, but melodic, and I think that's what I look for in prog these days.
I have like this block of albums that probably like were right around number 50 that were all like kind of dark or deathy. And Iatun was there along with Flesh God Apocalypse, Dark Tranquility, and Orpheus Omega. All 4 were right one after another on my list. It subject to change as most WWE cards, but I kind of like it does, like you had mentioned like earlier about being in a certain type of mood. Like these are 4 albums that I would have to be in a certain type of mood to listen to, but I listened to the Iatun album late on your recommendation, and I was kind of surprised at how much I enjoyed it. So I probably would have ranked it higher had I listened to it more, but again, like I said, that bottom 25 is still pending. So
very good. Very good. Number 8, I have Fellowship. Number 7, this was the other gigantic shock this album was not on your list. There was a period where this was even higher up on my list than the Elvalon album that finished at number 5. And I ultimately flipped the two because I think I like the Elvalon album even that much more. But I loved Another Side of You by Illumishade. This album is not perfect, but a lot of these songs are tremendous earworms. I don't know why. I didn't have incredibly high expectations, but this release was an instant hit for me, and it held up well enough that it stayed in my top 10. I thought you were going to love this album. I didn't hear you mention this band at all this year, let alone with this album. Did it not click for you?
I liked it. I again, it's another one of those albums that I think I could have stood to listen to more. There were some tracks I listened to a lot, and there were some tracks I didn't listen to very much at all. I also thought it was like a little overwhelming because there were so many tracks on it. But I thought I would enjoy it. You know, I don't think I ever had a chance to go back to it since I saw them at Prague Power. So I wouldn't be surprised if they also end up in the top 50 somewhere. But I don't know that I would put any of my top 25 albums ahead of this one. But I mean, we'll see. I like the band in general. I always have since they started, but it just didn't, at least on the first couple of listens, like really blow me away.
Okay, fair enough. I'm surprised by that, but listen, we all have our own opinions. At number 6, this was something I remember hearing, and I couldn't get enough of it. I don't often do this, but I played the album for the first time, and I immediately started playing it again. That's how much I was intrigued by this. This never happens. I often just go somewhere completely different with my next album. This one I just listened to a second time in a row. The band is called Aeons. The album is called The Ghost of What We Knew. This is a band from the Isle of Man. The first time a band from the Isle of Man is making my top 25 or top 50 list. This is an album I just kept going back to and back to. It's prog metal. It's heavy. A touch of djent, which I don't typically enjoy. A touch of metalcore, which I also don't typically enjoy. But when you infuse it with prog metal, this was a winner for me. This album is heavy, but it retains the melody throughout that some of these tracks just stick in your head. This is one of the most underrated albums I heard all year, and I strongly recommend people give it a listen.
I did listen to it back in July, and I never went back to it. I thought it was good. I just didn't get a chance to go back to it. So your high placement of it will convince me to go back and check it out again.
Very good, very good. Elvalon at number 5. At number 4, Turbulence's Binary Dream. This is another fantastic prog metal release, more enjoyable than their prior releases. Great song structures, a highly proficient technical band, but the emphasis here is not on the masturbatory playing, it's on the actual melody and the song themselves. Almost what you would want Dream Theater to sound like, more images and words and less, just going off the rails with some of the extended instrumental sections. This band really surprised me because I just didn't expect to like this album as much as I did. But with every time I listened to it, it just kept growing on me and growing on me. I've seen other people have this on their list, but still a band that's kind of under the radar for most people. But if you're a prog fan, you should check this out.
This is another one I missed. So it was on Frontiers, though, so I probably should listen to it.
There you go. At number 3, a very pleasant surprise. I didn't know that this band had this album in them because it has a different feel from some of the early albums, which I love. But even having a different feel from those early albums, this album was great and up there with those earlier releases. And it has great production, great melody, introspective lyrics, just an A+ release from Evergrey, Theories of Emptiness. I was curious to see if this was going to sneak its way into the top 25. Recent Evergrey albums have been very good, and I'll give them credit. They've had a resurgence the last 5 or 7 years, but this might be the best of the lot of them.
I like this album quite a bit. It is another one of those ones that was just outside of 25, but this might be my favorite Evergrey album ever. For me, with this modern version of Evergrey just keeps getting better and better. The hooks, I just find them to be so much more catchy and easy to listen to, compared to like the older stuff. Like I am, definitely becoming an Evergrey convert.
I am going to pick another one of their albums at some point because I want to go back and do more. I think that with the benefit of hindsight, you might even like some of the older albums a little bit better. Because if you like this album, there is definitely melody on some of those older albums. You just got to know where to look. So,
and the production on this album was phenomenal. It sounds so good.
I agree. It's top-notch production, and again, I don't know that I think they had this album in them. I was pleasantly surprised in that regard, but it made the top 3. I just adored it, and kudos to them for hooking me back in.
Evergrey and Freedom Call, turning heads in 2024.
Number 2, Cemetery Skyline, as I mentioned, and then we get to number 1.
Oh, can I guess?
Hold on.
Is it No Spoon again?
Hold on. In years past, it was so obvious to me. No Spoon. I don't know. I just think that in years past, it was just very clear to me that certain albums were head and shoulders above the rest. I don't know that I felt that way this year. I think there was a case that could be made for the Cemetery Skyline. I think there was a case that could have been made for the Evergrey. Even though it was a little further down the list, there was a case that could have been made for the Elvalon or the Aeons album. In its own way, even the Fellowship album at number 8 there was an argument that could be made. It could have been number 1, even though it was not. But this number 1 album was a band that I've always enjoyed, but this was their best release. The band is called In Vain. The album is called Solemn, and I've seen this high on a number of people's lists. It's been number 1 for me since the month that I heard it because I love this release. It's dense. It's heavy. It's a nice blend of genres. There's these brass sections that just show up that fit the music so beautifully, but at the same time, you have the dual growling vocals and cleans. This album checked off all the boxes, and yet I think you'll hate it. So I'm not going to recommend that you listen to it, but I love this release.
I did listen to it.
I want to hear your thoughts, but this is we talk about bucket list bands. I don't have many left. This is one of them. I am hoping they're one of the last bands announced for 70,000 Tons this year. I have to see this band live.
I listened to it when it came out, and I never listened to it again. I didn't dislike it. I definitely didn't dislike it, but it definitely would have been something that I would have had to listen to more than once to really give a fair opinion on.
I think that's fair. It's like I said, it was a very dense album, so I understand why you feel that way. At some point, if you have time, go back to it. I think it's worth at least one more listen, but I understand why it's not immediately accessible. But it grabbed me right away. I loved it. And that's my top 25. I just want to kind of mention the fan vote. This year on Patreon, we had a fans send in their top lists, and I'd be remiss not to mention.
I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to ask you. 2 bands that were not on either of our top 25 lists were the number 1 and the number 2 fan voted albums by our Patreon members. What were your thoughts on those 2 albums? Why don't you reveal those 2 albums?
So number 1 is Leprous' Melodies of Atonement. I don't know what I think of this album. I listened to it a few times, and when it came in at number 1, I actually went back and listened to it. And there are elements of this album that I like. There are elements of this album that I don't fully appreciate. So I don't know. It just didn't grab me like some of their other material. And I think that was the problem. I think it lacks some of the melody that I look for from bands. but I understand why people could go gaga over this. You'll have to refresh my recollection as to what number 2 was. I just don't recall it. Was it Suicidal Angels? Am I making that up?
It was Opeth.
Oh, Opeth. Opeth. I'm glad you brought this up because it gives me a chance to talk about the Opeth album. When I heard the single, I heard the growls like everybody else, and I got curious and excited, and I listened to this album a lot. I might have listened to the Opeth album almost as much as I listened to the Cemetery Skyline album, even though it came out much later in the year. And every time I listened to it, I didn't know what to make of it. I liked it. I didn't like it. Some songs stood out. Other songs stood out. And I just wasn't sure whether or not I liked it, whether I loved it, or whether I didn't have any taste for it at all. It was just a really bizarre listen. Then we covered Damnation on the podcast. And then I said to myself, you know something? I don't really enjoy the clean passages on the album as much as I did Damnation. Then I went back and I listened to Still Life. And I went back and I listened to Blackwater Park. And I'm like, I don't like the growls as much as I like those albums. And I think that's when I realized that although the elements are there, the songs are just not in the same vein as the Opeth that I not only like, but love. So the Opeth got an honorable mention for me because I listened to it a lot. And I think that there's parts of it that I do really enjoy. I'm lambasting it a little bit, but it's not as good as those earlier albums. It's not even close. And therefore I couldn't put it on my top 50.
It's not in my top 50 either, but I've just never been a big Opeth fan to begin with. I feel like our review of Damnation was definitely a step in the right direction for me. That style I enjoyed quite a bit. This was just like a little bit, it's almost like I wasn't ready for this. Like I'm not ready for The Last Will and Testament. Like maybe in a few years after we review some more albums or whatever. I don't think it was ever going to make my list at the end of the day, but I was a little surprised that it wasn't on yours, especially because it was so well received by our friends of the show. While we're on the topic, and I'll tell you something funny. Again, I have another glut of the same genre on my list around the 30 to 35 area, and it's all prog. It's Terra Maze, Vola, Leprous, and Evergrey all lumped together, all albums that I liked, but just were a little bit outside of my top 25. But another album that fell outside of my top 25 that also fell outside of your top 25, and I think should be considered a little bit disappointing, is Seven Spires released an album, A Fortress Called Home. And for me, like, if a Seven Spires album isn't in the top 20, you know, what happened? And this album I listened to it a bunch, and it didn't click for me the way their previous two albums did. I just thought they were on such a upward trajectory with Emerald Seas and Gods of Debauchery, and this one I just couldn't put my finger on it, but something just didn't click for me. I enjoyed it. It'll probably be in my top 50, but again, like much like Nightwish, like the expectations, I feel like the expectations for this were even higher than Nightwish, because Nightwish already disappointed us with the last one. This one I feel like is like the first Seven Spires album for me that I was kind of like, oh, I was kind of hoping for more. I'm gonna listen to it one more time, but just the fact that it didn't land in my top 25 makes it at least slightly disappointing.
I had it on my list for a while. It got bumped. It's on my honorable mention list. And that's why it's a disappointment. I also had high expectations for this. I heard some of the songs live before I heard them on the album, and they came off great live when they were opening for, if memory serves, I think they opened for Camelot or something like that. I remember them playing out here on Long Island. Great show, great songs live. But then I got the album, and I think my biggest issue was the production. They used a different producer, and I think it was Bruce Short, the guy that produces the Pineapple Thief albums, more of a prog type of production on this, and it left everything just a little bit flat for me. And I think that if it was mixed differently, it could have had a different outcome, because obviously, like I said, I enjoyed the stuff live. but this album was a disappointment in that regards. And I hate to say it because I feel like the music is good. And if they played the whole album live, I probably would really enjoy it, but I didn't love the album. I liked it. It's honorable mention, but it's better than hundreds of other albums that I checked out this year, but it's not in the top 50.
I have one other album I want to give an honorable mention to. It was in my top 25 and it got pushed out kind of at the last minute, but I really want to shine a light on this one because I thought it was like just an album I had zero expectations for. It was Terrence Holler's solo album, Reborn. This was his first really anything that he did after leaving Eldritch, which essentially, at least to my understanding, was his band. This is nothing like Eldritch. I like this better than the last two Eldritch albums that he was not a part of. It really has some 80s radio play sensibility to it, but it's great. Like the keyboards, like I love his voice. Always have, always will. To me, he is the voice of Eldritch, period, end of story. This was just a cool, fun album that, like, I don't know. Like, I feel like because there were no expectations, it was weird. It was out there. It didn't fit in with anything else I listened to, and I had The Offspring in my top 25. But I like this album a lot. I thought it was really good. It'll probably be in my top 30 to 35 at the end of the day. But I could see why, like, a lot of people probably didn't even know that it was released. But I like this one quite a bit.
It was a really interesting release, and I didn't know what to expect from him because I didn't know if he was going to go with something in the same vein as an Eldritch or if he was going to pivot. And he pivoted. He went with that 80s retro style, but it's kind of unlike anything I've ever heard. It was just it reminded me of things, but you wouldn't draw any like stark comparisons to anything. But it definitely has that retro vibe. An interesting release. I'm glad you liked it as much as you did. We got to have him on to talk about that at some point.
I would love to. I would argue it was the most unique album of the year that I listened to.
Yeah, I agree. Before we go, we were running along. It's almost been 2 hours at this point. I want to just do a couple of superlatives. You mentioned your big disappointments earlier, Nightwish being, I guess, one of them, Seven Spires. Do you have a number one big disappointment, or are those just in the mix?
Yeah, I feel like it's probably Nightwish at the end of the day, only because even though Human Nature was disappointing in and of itself, it's just like the expectations for a band of that magnitude are so big for me that it's just, I don't know, like I just really wanted it to be better. I also, this one's a little bit less or so, but this was a sophomore release that I didn't really dig as much as the debut, and that was Nocturna's Of Sorcery and Darkness. I really liked that debut album. I want to say it was in my top 20 if memory serves, and I thought this was good. It just didn't quite hit the way that first album did. As I'm scrolling through the list, the new Dragony album was lower than I thought it would be. The new Visions of Atlantis album was lower than I thought it would be. I saw that pretty high on some people's lists. I didn't think Pirates 2 was as good as Pirates 1. That's just, that was just me. That'd probably be it. I've seen a lot of people had Judas Priest on their lists. I've never been the biggest Judas Priest fan, but I thought that their new album was really solid. But yeah, I think like if I had to say like there was one like the biggest disappointment, yeah, it probably was Nightwish, and I still liked it more than probably most of the albums I listened to. But again, like a Nightwish album outside of the top 5, never mind the top 25, I feel like is a disappointment in and of itself. Do you have a number one? Is it Opeth?
No, it's not, because I don't think I had tremendous expectations for it. So that actually exceeded expectations in certain ways.
How about Balance of Power?
Bingo. You hit the nail on the head. That was an album that I was so happy to hear that this band was back, and it had been so many years since they had done anything, and I was so excited. If you recall, they supposedly got together with Corey Brown from Magnitude 9, like 20 years ago at this point, and they just never did anything. They never released an album, and then they just went dormant. So I figured, all right, after all these years, I was expecting this monster of an album. The album was called Fresh from the Abyss, aptly named. Out of nowhere, Balance of Power puts out a new album in 2024, and it sucked. And it was just a big disappointment for me. I just didn't get into the album, and I went back. I listened to it a second time, and it didn't help the cause. It was really disappointing, and I'm not. And I say that because everything they've ever done, I've loved, except the new album just wasn't even close to any of the older material. So I'm gonna go back and listen to 10 more Tales of Grand Illusion, and I'll catch you. No, I'm just kidding. But that to me was the biggest disappointment. You nailed it with that one. The biggest comeback album, I think Sonata Arctica for me would be that. Best cover art, 2 albums in particular, one of which I think some people might be surprised that I didn't have on my list. Actually, the band is called Azure. The album is called Fim. I know Glenn had it on his, top 50 list. It was a little weird for me. I know one of our Patreon members, Patrick Celsus, loved this Azure album. I think I just need more time with it. That being said, I love the cover art. Another album is by a band called Jaguar God. The album is called Micklin. Very cool cover art for that as well. The biggest surprise, I'm curious to know about your biggest surprise. Mine is Evergrey. I just never thought they'd be a top 3 band for me at this point in their career, but I love the album.
I will circle back to comeback of the year. It has to be Freedom Call for me, for them to be at number 2.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Biggest surprise. Probably Timeless Fairy Tale. Just that this Royal Hunt clone just rises out of nowhere. For me, that was just, I don't know, surprise or just completely unexpected. I just was not, I mean, who the hell would have seen that coming? If somebody said, "Hey, guess what? Land of Broken Hearts is gonna have a resurrection, 30 years later." So yeah, and I saw so many people were really impressed by it. So that would probably be my choice.
I love it. I'm glad to hear it. I want to just ask you. You mentioned best cover song, so I'll just say mine was Reverber's cover of Thor the Power Ahead by Manowar. I had played that. I think I posted it on our socials. I was blown away by that cover. I thought it was just really full of power and energy. And then I'm curious about 2 more things, and then we'll wrap it up. Did you have any EPs that jumped out to you? And then, of course, most anticipated release for next year, now 2025.
There were a couple of EPs, nothing that I would say one stood out more than the other. So I'll just name a couple of them that I really liked. Dialith had a EP called Altar that I, enjoyed quite a bit. I believe that was, I want to say that was on your recommendation, but that was just a band that I was not familiar with. And I ended up enjoying this quite a bit, so I'm looking forward to their first full length album. They're actually a band from here in the States, from Connecticut. Have to mention Love Bites. They released the Love Bites EP 2. They have gone even further up my list of favorite bands after their performance at Prague Power. Go back and listen to our Prague Power episode if you want to hear me sing their praises. And I will also mention Seven Kingdoms released a really good EP called The Square. They're another band that I feel like has been just gradually getting better and better over the years, and I look forward to their next full-length album as well. I don't know that any of those were better than the other, but those were 3 that I enjoyed quite a bit.
There was a band that all of a sudden put out an EP this year. They're out of Belgium. The band is called Axamenta. I was familiar with their earlier stuff. I was not expecting them to put out this EP called Spires. It's interesting because it's only 23 minutes, but it's 8 tracks. It touches upon a lot of different things: melodic death metal, cinematic music, in the John Williams vein, and prog, all blended together. This was a really interesting EP. It was 7 different I'm sorry, I may have said 8 before. It was 7 different sections to this EP or song. Came out in July. Highly recommended. My favorite EP of the year. And
got a question for you.
Yeah.
Did you have a song of the year that was like a non-album song? Because I have a song that was not on an album, and I just found out literally yesterday that it will be on an album in 2025, but I'm going to call it my 2024 non-album single of the year. And it was Marco and Tarja's duet, Left on Mars. It's going to be on Marco's Roses from the Deep album, but at the time I just assumed it was a one-off, but hearing the two of them together was lovely, and the song is actually really good. So that was my non-album single of the year.
Nice. I did not have one, so I will defer to you. I'm sure it was excellent. I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but there's 2 albums in particular that are allegedly coming out in 2025, which just I'm looking forward to immensely. I'm sure you can guess what they are, but do you share my sentiment?
I want to say you're talking about Dream Theater and Avantasia, perhaps?
Neither one of those is the correct answer. I was looking for Halloween.
Oh, I didn't realize Halloween was definitely releasing an album this year.
I mean, they're in the studio now. I think it's coming out this year. And similarly, Sabotage is supposedly.
Yeah.
So those two.
If those 2 albums come out in 2025, if they're not 1 and 2, it's going to be a disappointment.
That's your biggest disappointment,
right?
100%.
It has to be, right?
No questions asked.
Halloween's never released an album that wasn't number 1 on both of our lists in the history of this podcast. So,
well, no pressure, guys. No pressure.
Yep.
And that's it. Those are basically the superlatives I wanted to go over.
Did you have a song of the year? Like any song?
Oh yeah, you know what? I do. My song of the year. I have 2 of them. I'll give an honorable mention. There's a band called God is an Astronaut, and they came out with a song called Embers. It's an entirely instrumental tune, and you might be saying to yourself, an entirely instrumental tune. Yeah, this song Embers is fantastic. Go listen to it. But my song of the year, and it's a bit of a nostalgia nod. I thought Anathema was dead. I thought they were buried. I thought they were not coming back. And all of a sudden, this band Weather Systems surfaces. And it's not my favorite album, although it's on my top 50 list. But they not only sound like Anathema, they were giving a nod to some of the Anathema songs, creating sequels to Anathema music. So they came out with a song, Untouchable Part 3. I absolutely love 1 and 2. They're amongst my favorite songs of all time. And for me to enjoy Part 3 as much as I did, it has to be my song of the year, because anything less than fantastic was going to be a disappointment, because I love the first 2 so much. Great song.
Excellent. I am not a user of Spotify, but I ended up getting a Last FM wrap up for the year. And for those who are unaware, Last FM is like, they have what is called a scrobbler, and it's just like a background app for your PC. And it basically, much like Spotify, just records everything you listen to and compiles everything into most listened and all that stuff. So all the while, everybody's showing off their Spotify Wrapped list, and I'm like, I don't know what I listen to. I get my Last FM list, and my my most listened to artists of 2024, Toad the Wet Sprocket. I listened to that band so much in anticipation of seeing them live that they ended up being my most listened to band. And mostly that's because everything else was just bands that I was listening to for the podcast. Like, it literally, like, if you go down the list, it's every album that we've covered for the podcast over 2024. But there was one song that I listened to more than any other song, and it was Elvalon's A Legacy Divine. It wasn't one of the singles from this album, but to me, it's the best song on the album. It's my favorite song of the year. I listened to it like 20 times, and I can't get enough of it. It's as good of a song as I've heard any symphonic metal band release in a long time. So, album of the year and song of the year from the same band for me.
I love it. I thought you were going to say A Vagabond's Heart, but nonetheless, great choice.
Another great song without a doubt. I mean, the whole album's phenomenal, but this one I think is even this one stood out, and that's saying something. So yeah, this is I love this album. I can't believe that there was such a long time where I wasn't sure like what my number one album was. I'm sure you had said it was similar for you as well. Halloween's last album, Unleash the Archer's Abyss album, like those albums were, I knew when I heard them, I was like, this is my album of the year. The last 3 years have been really difficult. And I feel like it's come down to like the very end after I've really listened to the albums and exhausted my listens that it's like I've come to a conclusion. I wonder if 2025 will be a year where we're more sure of the album. But man, there was just a ton of great stuff. But I would say like my top 5 albums all could have been number one at some point, honestly.
I love it. I love doing this episode. It's a perfect wrap of 2024. And as we forge on ahead, I'm already looking forward to the year-end list of 2025. So thanks for doing this. Next week, we come back with our regularly scheduled format. We come back with Sanctuary's Refuge Denied from 1988. So a little bit of thrash, a little bit of traditional metal, and a lot of Warrel Dane discussion next week on the podcast. Chris, always a pleasure. I look forward to catching up with you soon.
Sounds good. My voice is shot, so I'm going to go to bed.
Have a good one, my friend.